Okay, you guys are absolutely going to love this episode. We have Dr. Rick Matsen, who is the OG of shoulder. I mean, he tells this incredible story that he did his fellowship with Dr. Neer, lived in Dr. Neer's house for 3 months with his wife. And the only way that you could use the Neer prosthesis back in that day was if you came and did a fellowship and met with him. So it's Charlie Rockwood. I mean, the names that he's throwing out are just absolutely unbelievable and literally helped to create the specialty of shoulder. He was the founding member of the ASCS, the past president of the ASCS. Of course, there's this little book called Rockwood and Matsen, The Shoulder, which is now in its sixth edition of printing over 50 years. I mean, it's just unbelievable. He is incredibly sharp. He's still taking care of patients and operating at the age of 79, has an incredible blog that he's using. He's basically reimagined himself and has put himself into the digital space. Unbelievable story. You're going to love every second of it. Dr. Scott Sigman, hashtag follow the fro.
From Medical Media, this is The Ortho Show.
Hello, world. Dr. Scott Sigman, your favorite opioid-sparing orthopedic surgeon, here for another episode of the Ortho Show podcast, where everyone knows we bring you the best of the best in orthopedics. We're super excited about our YouTube channel now, so you can see us as well as listen to us in all places you listen to podcasts. Today is going to be an exceptionally special episode. We're very pleased that we can bring on Dr. Rick Matsen, who is a professor of orthopedic surgery at the University of Washington School of Medicine. He is literally one of the original founders of the concept of the shoulder specialty within orthopedic surgery. And, Dr. Matsen, what a pleasure it is to have you on the show.
Thank you for inviting me, Scott.
Oh, it is my pleasure. So listen, we always start at the beginning. We want to know the story of your life. And so where did I guess you were born in Austin, Texas. You're a Texas guy. You spent a lot of time there. But where did the idea of becoming a doctor come from you? Was that early on? Is it family? Where did that come from?
I'm going to tell you an embarrassing story, but I lived in Austin. My dad was a professor of physical chemistry at the University of Texas. He took me to the Texas Longhorn games and marched in the band and all that sort of stuff. And I started dating this gal. And my dad got concerned that I was a little too sweet on her. That was his words. And that this may lead to a sort of a detraction from the academic career that he had set me on. And so I was nearing the end of my third year at the University of Texas. And he said, guess what? I found out that you have met all the prerequisites for going to medical school. And you, my friend, are going to medical school next year at Baylor. So he had somehow engineered this. And so I got expatriated from Austin to Houston. And went to medical school there, had a great time, and ended up marrying the girl anyway.
And, Steve Snyder tells such an exact similar story. It's so funny about how his father-in-law tried to chase him away, but yet at the end of the day, he still succeeded and married the girl of his dreams. So that's that. So are you the first doctor in the family then?
I'm the first physician. My dad was a PhD, but his dad was a barber from Denmark. Appropriate origins from surgery, right? Because those were the original surgeons.
100%.
And so he was a Danish immigrant, and my grandma was a seamstress, and they came from Denmark in 1918. And my dad was born in Racine, Wisconsin, moved down to Texas, and became a physical chemist there.
Yeah, fantastic immigrant story, which again we hear so much of. So I have to ask you, were you on the field with Matthew McConaughey for the Texas game win that they had over Alabama this past weekend?
No, but I was on the field a lot with the Darrell Royal back in those days. And
that's awesome.
You would have really liked this whole Texas football scene, because the 100-piece Longhorn marching band would march down Congress Avenue in Austin to the shores of Town Lake, where there would be this huge bonfire, and they would have the mascot of the opposing team, let's say the Texas Aggies, on top of this bonfire, Darrell Roy would say, fans, this is going to be a tough game. And unless you guys all come and stand on your feet for the entire game and scream your heads off, we're going to have trouble. Are you going to be there for me? And the whole crowd would just go nuts. And then they'd light the bonfire. And then you can only imagine the libations that followed. But it was a pretty wild scene.
Yeah, I don't think there's much that's changed in college football down in Texas. I think that they still trying to rile them up and have a great time, and what a spectacle it is, and what a pleasure it is to watch. All right, so let's get back to medicine. That was a great story, but all right, so you're off to Baylor, to get your medical degree. When did orthopedics come into play for you, that you knew that that's the specialty for you?
Well, that's another crazy story, because I went to Hopkins as an intern, and then I was going to the NIH for 2 years. This was during the Vietnam War, and so one of the ways that you could avoid being conscripted was to join the public health service. So I was able to get a position at the National Institutes of Health in my chosen field, which was neurosurgery. And so for 2 years, I did neurosurgery at the NIH, and we dealt with intractable pain, intractable epilepsy, intractable brain tumors, intractable movement disorders, and untreatable spinal cord AVMs. And after 2 years of that, I got progressively disenchanted with that field. And so one night, while I was developing photographs in my bathroom at there in Bethesda, I just decided I could not hack it in neurosurgery. And so I decided I would abdicate and look around for another specialty. So I did what you would do. I asked the anesthesiologists, who are the happiest surgical specialists? And they said, that's easy. They're orthopedic surgeons. At Baylor, I never had an orthopedic rotation or anything. But I decided I would apply for orthopedic programs. And one of the benefits of being out there in Bethesda is I got a chance to get introduced to rock climbing and whitewater boating and all that sort of stuff. So I applied only to programs that had those things nearby, and wound up here at the University of Washington.
Wonderful story. So amazing. So neurosurgeon to finally figuring out the cool guys or the orthopedic surgeons. You make the transition. You head out to University of Washington where you do your residency. And, it's an interesting time, right? You're in your residency in the 70s. Orthopedics, is not even necessarily being done by orthopedic surgeons out in the community, right? A lot of general surgeons were pinning hips and taking care of fractures. We hadn't really developed this great program. So what sparked your interest while you were in residency? Obviously, we know where you wound up, which is the shoulder, but what was happening back then? What was happening in residency, and how did you decide on the subspecialty that you were going to train in?
Well, you're so right, because most orthopedic academic programs were under the umbrella of general surgery. So we had an iron-handed Henry Harkins of general surgery that was ruling the roost. And it was during my tenure as a resident that D.K. Clausen took our department from being a division to being a department, which was a huge step forward, and one of the earlier departments to make that transition. And so on completion of my residency in about 1975, he asked if I'd like to stay on in the faculty, and I said, great. He said, I sent Sigvard T. Hansen over to Germany to learn how to do IM nailing. I'd like to send you back to New York to learn from Dr. Charles Neer about how to do shoulder surgery, because no one around here knows anything about shoulders. So D.K. Clausen was that kind of guy who was always mentoring people. And as a result of that, I went to spend some time with Charles Neer. My wife came with me, and actually Charles Neer put me up in his house for 3 months. Can you imagine that? And my daughter, Susanna, who's now a breast surgeon in Philadelphia, came along with us, and we were hosted royally by Dr. Neer in his house. So I had sort of a total immersion Neer experience. And that was one of
Wow.
there were at that time there were no such things, Scott, as shoulder fellowships or any of that sort of stuff. This was just sort of a little sideline thing that he organized for people, that Neer organized for people who he thought might be successful in shoulder surgery.
It didn't exist. I mean, the idea of like somebody that would only specialize in the shoulder within orthopedics in the late 70s. I mean, perhaps was it maybe Charlie Rockwood down in San Antonio was up and running at that time as well?
No, he
Or
wasn't up and running. He was in the same position as I was, essentially, because he went and spent time with Charlie Neer, so he and Bob Cofield and Russ Warren and all those guys, Louis Biliani, all spent time with Charlie Neer, and we were sort of the first chickens out of the nest. And Neer was interesting. He would only allow people to use his shoulder implants if they had spent time with him. So he didn't care anything about royalties, but he cared a lot about control of people who were going to use his implants, because the last thing he wanted was people to get bad results with the Neer arthroplasty. So you had to be schooled by him, and the company would not sell their stuff to you unless you had Charlie's imprimatur.
That's absolutely phenomenal. And the names that you just rolled off your tongue, are just such, iconic leaders within orthopedics and shoulders. So what at the absolute infancy of this specialty, and what a pleasure it is to sort of hear that very unique story. So you go, so Bill Levine's a dear friend of mine, so Bill, you're going to have to start putting your traveling fellows in the house. I mean, there is precedent at this point as well, but what a wonderful experience to live with Dr. Neer and live, eat, and breathe shoulder and understand. And then you head back to University of Washington to establish a shoulder position and faculty and a division, if you will. And where did it go from there?
So again, Dr. Clausen was still the chairman, and he said, what we want you to do is to become a triple threat in the shoulder world. So that means practice and research and teaching. And I want to see some articles. I want to see some good clinical results, and I want to see residents that feel like they know something about the shoulder. So he just wound me up and put me on the ground and let me take off. And he was an incredible guy, Scott, because once he sort of wound you up and put you on the ground, he didn't mess with you after that. He just let you do your thing, just like he did with Hansen in the I Am Nail. And he was very, very nurturing. I mean, he would try to knock down obstacles in front of us, but would not try to tell you to turn left or right. He said, just do your thing.
And so to be clear, when you came back and you set up and he gave you the reins, which is wonderful, another great story, was it just shoulder at that point where you were like, okay, this is what I'm going to focus on? I can do shoulder replacements. I have the blessing of Dr. Neer. We've got rotator cuffs. We have instability. But did your practice 100% focus on shoulder as it was developing?
No, absolutely not, because there just wasn't enough of it. And so I was doing probably like what many people do. I mean, I started out as a general orthopedic surgeon. I was doing backs, I was doing feet, I was doing hands, discectomies and all that sort of stuff back in the day. And then gradually, I dropped out of peds, I dropped out of foot, I dropped out of hip and knee, and sort of wound up with shoulder and elbow, and that's sort of where it stood. But it was as the shoulder and elbow practice developed, I was able to discard the other specialties to people who knew more about them than I did.
So let's talk about that. So you're a founding member of the American Shoulder and Elbow Society. When did that society get started?
Oh, you're going to embarrass me now. I don't think I'll have to tell you later what the exact date was, but
you were the president in 1990, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I think that was your year.
Yeah. So that was the 10th anniversary. I do remember that. Yeah. So because I remember we hosted the meeting out here, and we had a wonderful salmon dinner over at Blake Island, and then I took everybody to the space Air and Space Museum out here, where we got a chance to walk around every possible airplane in the world and had a really nice dinner out there. And we had all the people that you can imagine were there, including the original generation, but a whole 10 years of subsequent shining stars of shoulder surgery.
You know, it's interesting. We had Javier Duralde on, who, as you know, is the immediate past president, private practice shoulder specialist, another wonderful shoulder specialist from Atlanta. And he recalls the day in which he was accepted into the ASCS. And he said it was one of the most, the most proud moments of his life. You know, we had to make sure he remembered about his kids and his wife. But, at the end of the day, he was like, I'm sitting in this room. There were 200 shoulder specialists, from around the world and who were just the tops at their game. And it was just remarkable. Nowadays, there's a lot more members, but back in the day, it was a pretty exclusive club. I mean, you had to really prove your worth to be able to get in.
Actually, it's interesting because it didn't start out as the ASCS. It just started out as a group of Neer acolytes, if you will. And sure. He would have a meeting, at the academy. We'd all get together, and he'd have meetings in New York at the Waldorf Astoria, and we'd sit around and eat and talk about shoulder stuff. But it wasn't a formal society. It was just a small number of people that did that sort of thing. And we would argue about how to manage this and that. And he would sort of rule the roost, as you can imagine. And it was after that had sort of percolated for several years, and people said, well, maybe we ought to formalize this as a society. And Bob Cofield was very instrumental in sort of crafting, as he is very good at, sort of the organization and the bylaws and all that sort of thing. So Dr. Neer was, of course, the first president, and ASCS. And I was one of the people that argued for keeping it small, because I thought that if you kept the society small, people could say what they wanted and still be friends, and it wasn't trying to show off for anybody. You and I and 20 of our favorite friends are sitting around a table, and we just talk about what's important. And that's the way I think ideas can be hammered out. Now it's gotten to be huge. I mean, it's a mini academy now. But my vision, I have to confess, was keep it small. I think the Hip Society for a while was like that. You may know more, but there was something about just have a limited number of members, and people really had to work hard to make it into the group, and that kept it from having people that were sort of casually associated with the shoulder involved.
Yeah, great story. And well, I mean, look, the specialty has grown. I mean, there's just so many more orthopedic surgeons now, and some guys only work. I joke around, I say I'm a healer of knees and shoulders left and right. Is it going to get to the point where we're only doing the left side? I mean, who knows? But truly a wonderful story about the origins of the American Shoulder and Elbow Society as well. So let's talk about another thing, which we were talking about 1990. So 1990 for me, I was graduating medical school and going into internship, and I remember my red 2-volume with a black sort of emblem in the middle, Rockwood and Matsen, The Shoulder, right? That was the Bible, if you will, for residents and people in training within orthopedics to sort of understand and get to know what the shoulder is all about. So when did you and Charlie Rockwood get together and say, let's build this thing?
Yeah, that book is now in its 6th edition. Can you imagine that?
Amazing.
So one of the things that Charlie Rockwood, that's a whole different branch of the tree, right? So Charlie Rockwood got to know me through these little meetings with the Neer group, and he was president of the academy. So he said, I think we're going to organize some travel courses. We might as well have some fun. So we're going to go to Acapulco. And so we go to Acapulco and put on a shoulder course in Acapulco. And that gave us plenty of time to sit around and drink a little and talk a lot, or the other way around. And the first thing he says, I think that we can, this is going to sound heretical. He says, I think we can come up with a better shoulder prosthesis than the Neer. So if this sounds like et tu brute, there it is. But anyway,
That's like a big deal, right?
so it's the usual back of a napkin sort of thing. And we said, well, the glenoid could be improved by putting pegs on it rather than having a keel, and the humeral implant should be modular, and blah blah blah. So then we sketched this out, and he took the napkin to a guy by the name of Jeff Andrala, who's a wonderful engineer, and Jeff sort of made it happen through Depew. And so that was sort of the beginning of our more than casual relationship. And then he said, I don't know how well you knew him, but he had this funny way, and he would sort of do this. And he said, I think we ought to write a book. I don't like any of the shoulder techs that are out there. Would you be willing to do it with me? And I said, of course. And so we sort of divided the labors. He was the guy that sort of picked the authors and whipped them into shape. I mean, if you were late on your chapter, you're going to get a phone call like every week. Scott, where is your chapter? And I had the job of sort of editing all this stuff. So his job was to get it in the door. My job was to get it out the door in reasonable fashion. So that was our divided labor. And but he was wonderful to work with because he had skills that I wasn't even close to having, and I was able to help a little bit with the writing side of things. So that's where that happened.
That's just an amazing story. Again, I mean, it's just something that you take for granted, that you have this amazing textbook that's been around forever, but somebody had to start it, and here you are. I mean, I have to ask, how old are you? How old are you, Rick? We need to know.
I'm 79 now, and
I mean,
still
sharp
working.
As a tack. Still working. You're sharp as a tack. I mean, it's like, as a general rule, they say pediatricians, don't retire, they die. Most orthopedic surgeons, decide to retire at one point or another. But man, you're all over this, and it has to be very gratifying for you to know that, that book's been around for 40 years at this point, 50 years, sixth edition. The things that you were dealing with and thinking about early on before anybody even knew what the shoulder was are now still being taught and recognized by leaders in their field, decades and generations later.
It's fun.
Pretty cool.
Rockwood, you probably know this about Rockwood, but Rockwood was a book writer, and the way he got the admiration of the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons is he wrote this book on emergent care of the sick and injured, which was the first AAOS publication. And that got all the AAOS literature stuff. And then he did, he wrote a book with David Green.
Rockwood and Green, the classic book for fractures. I mean, yes. It's unbelievable.
So, I mean, he was like Clausen or like Neer. I mean, he was a real visionary and could sort of see a path. And he was good at being sort of on the path before anybody else was. I mean, he could sort of see what was coming. And
pioneers they're a rare breed, right? To be able to see around corners and identify things and in a way that really hasn't been seen before. Look, you have incredible, knowledge here, Dr. Matsen. So I want to pick your brain a little bit for our listeners. And we're going to keep it pretty basic, but I'm going to ask you two questions. The first question I'm going to ask you is, what's wrong with orthopedics today? I know you have a blog. You're staying very much interested in arthroplasty in the shoulder and there are so many new ways to do arthroplasty of the shoulder. It's remarkable, as we started back from the Neer prosthesis, which was 2 sizes, amazing what we can do these days. But so I know you're keeping abreast of all this. What do you see that's wrong with what we're doing in orthopedics today?
Well, let me still say that orthopedics is still the best job in the world. I got into it because the anesthesiologist said the orthopedic surgeons were the happiest. And I still think that that's right. I mean, if you look around, very few of us are moping around saying, I'm tired of practice, I'm going to go do something else. And as a result, the aging orthopedic surgeon has become a big topic, and here I am. So, but I wouldn't say that anything is wrong, but I think that there are things that we can do better. And I think that one of the things that is important to recognize is the relationship between industry and practice, and trying to recognize, not get rid of, but trying to recognize the influences of each on the other. And I think that this is something that's it's really important because, as you know, 99% of orthopedic surgeons have industrial relationships, and that's appropriate. But I think that probably we could do a better job of acknowledging that in presentations so that the readers and the listeners could say, I'm talking about, say, the subacromial balloon catheter, and in the limitations section of my paper, rather than saying I've got disclosures that you can go hunt around with, about 3 clicks you can find out, just put it in the paper that one of the limitations of this paper is that the authors get royalties or what speakers fees from Stryker or whatever. And because I think that people deserve to know. You know, there's a current Supreme Court justice who is getting money that may or may not be appropriate. It would have been a lot nicer if that had been stated up front rather than discovered. And I just think people should have the opportunity to know that as they read the article, because then they can understand it a little bit better. I mean, everybody understands innovation. Everybody wants it because that's what makes us better. But I would say that if I could, that would be one of the things that I'd tweak about the system, is make that part of the limitations section of a paper on my new shoulder prosthesis or my new widget or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, look, you were part of, I mean, you worked with DePuy to come up with a shoulder replacement. So, I mean, you can't develop new products as a lead physician, as a, you know, without having industry, unless you got your own bankroll in some machine shop in the backyard to be able to do this. So you have to work. So you know, I think that's actually wonderful. I mean, better transparency in industry physician relationships, but don't stop it, right? Don't stop the progression innovation. Just be more transparent about what your relationships are. So when people read the paper, there's an internal bias, and be able to just understand that and take it for what it's worth. I think that's very sound. All right, I'm going to ask you another question. What do you really like about orthopedics right now?
Everything. What I like is the opportunity to ask good questions and try to get good answers. And, you know, you made the comment about bias. I like to be transparent about bias. I mean, there's people, when they write papers, they talk about selection bias as being a bad thing. It's a good thing. Scott uses selection bias when he decides who to operate on. That's what you're supposed to do. I mean, you shouldn't be operating on people that aren't going to do well. So I think selection bias is just what we ought to be doing, and we ought to be selective, and we ought to, again, admit that. And I think when what we're trying to do here, and I think most orthopedic surgeons are trying to do, is to make sure that we put our efforts in a direction that's going to benefit patients, and recognize that just because somebody has arthritis doesn't mean they have to have a joint replacement, because some people are going to do better, all things considered, with non-operative management, just because they're not great candidates for surgical reconstruction. And so what I think is good about it is that it's still a rapidly developing field. I think we're getting better at doing research. We're getting better at teaching, and we're getting better at taking care of our patients. And we're learning together. And I think that's the great thing. And there's so many venues for sharing information. And it's just a terrific place to be, which is why I'm going to hop till I drop as far as the practice is concerned. It's just too much fun. And it's going to sound silly, but I get up every morning saying, I'm so happy to be doing what I'm doing, and I can't wait to get to my desk and write, or get to the clinic and see patients, or go to the OR. I'm still jazzed about it.
There's nothing better than waking up in the morning and being really excited about what you do. This is what I love about the Ortho Show, Rick. We just bring on some of the most, remarkable, unique individuals. They happen to be orthopedic surgeons, but they're making huge contributions on the planet for patients and education. And, one word comes to mind for, first and foremost for you, which is wisdom and experience. But I also have a great sense of humility that I sense from you in your purpose. We want to thank you for, being one of the original founders of the specialty of shoulder. And it's really quite amazing where it's taken us to this day, and certainly could not have started without you and your really incredible, contribution, as well as to education and the papers that you write, and the fact that you are still working and operating at the age of 79, and you are sharp as a tack. I mean, it has just been a very refreshing episode, and we're so thrilled that you took the time out of your day to spend some time to share your story with us.
I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed meeting you. I'm just really appreciative of what you do, trying to spread the word and show people that are happy doing what they're doing. Because, again, there are a lot of people that are considering careers and making a lot of choices, but I still think this is the best one ever. And I'm proud that I've got a daughter who's one of the major hip and knee surgeons here in this small town of ours, and doing a great job. And she loves her job, and she loves her life. And it's just another example of people enjoying this specialty.
What an absolute pleasure it's been to have you on, Dr. Matsen. This is Dr. Scott Sigman, #FollowTheFro, host of The Ortho Show. Till next time.